Hey, what's up, everyone? It is Will, and welcome to the podcast. So in this episode, I want to start off with this amazing quote from the billionaire Charlie Munger. He's not just a wealthy businessman. He's actually a philosopher. He really understands a lot about life and living a good life beyond just money. Here's one of his quotes. Don't drift into self-pity because it doesn't solve any problems. Now, today in this episode, we're going to be covering a highly thought-provoking topic. I have everything I thought I wanted, but I'm still not happy. Why? Now, this is a question that a lot of people run into, especially people who seem to have achieved a lot of quote-unquote success, whether it's wealth, money, fame, fortune, a great business, cars, a house, and sometimes, unfortunately, they've wasted decades of their life before they finally hit this point because it's not easy. It doesn't take a short time to achieve all this. And then, once they're there, they only then discover, oh my goodness, I'm not much happier. Now, if you've listened to my other episodes of this podcast, I've hinted at this. Again, it's one of my hidden central themes to all the stuff that I talk about because it's such a prevalent topic that every one of us has to deal with or we're unaware of. I mean, all around me, I see it all the time. People my age, younger, older, they're chasing all these things that they think will bring them happiness that science has shown will probably not. And you have millions of people chasing this stuff, billions, because media, because television, because entertainment, because the rappers and celebrities they see flaunt this stuff to make more money because they themselves think it'll bring them more happiness when it doesn't actually. So it's this like constant vicious cycle, fulfilling cycle, and you don't know what's going on until you look at the science of happiness. And that is something I was fortunate enough to get into a few years ago because I was really confused about this and really struggling with what actually makes you happy. And, I talked to a lot of different people of all different backgrounds, psychiatrists, free ones. Back then I had I had access to this because I was a student. I had a free psychiatrist you can go to. And I also talked to religious people. I talked to all sorts of different people. Then I went through a bunch of books on happiness. Most of them were pretty crappy. Like some of them claimed to be like books on the science of happiness, but the way that they were organized were just really messy. Like they would only have like one or two random studies in them that were like partially related to happiness. And you just finished a book feeling kind of lost and confused. But long story short, I finally started hitting some good stuff. Lo and behold, luckily enough, there actually has been decades of research on this, and more has been coming out. It's definitely a new field. In terms of study, it's called the study of positive psychology, but there actually has been one book that I think is the number one go-to must-read on this topic. It's called The How of Happiness, and someone has actually gone out there and really written the A to Z on happiness, and then, compiled all the science of happiness and broke it down comprehensively into a book that's still not overly long, not overly boring, and written in a conversational tone that anyone can really understand. And after a lot of digging, I found that book, and now you don't have to go through all that work. But if you're even lazier, you can just listen to this podcast, and I'll really break it down. And I really think this is a huge pain point because so many people, I see it all the time. I listen to a lot of podcasts every day. I watch a lot of YouTube videos of successful entrepreneurs. Like a majority of the stuff I listen to, and I'm definitely a rarity. Everyone else my age really doesn't do any of this, but the majority of my time spent consuming stuff is on successful people. So again, I'm not saying this to brag, but just to give you like a cross reference. I've probably consumed thousands of successful entrepreneurs who have made millions of dollars, if not billions, and many in the $1 million range. They hit this point where they're like, is this all there is to it? That's the almost exact words that many of them say. They ask themselves, is this all there is to it? And I can't tell you how many have written books on the topic, how many have done videos, gone to podcasts and talked about this. And it's kind of more sort of a afterthought, and I kind of just wanted to focus an entire podcast on this. Very recently, in fact, Vishen Lakhiani, who's fairly well known in his online marketing industry, he wrote a book, Code of the Extraordinary Mind, on this. There's also Jeff Walker, who's also very well known in his industry. He did a whole YouTube video on this topic. And some of these, all these people, they kind of just didn't really think about it until they finally got everything they wanted. And if you wait that long, it's kind of like, that's really unfortunate, because you waste years of your life, years of time and money pursuing something that you don't need to. And I mean, there's so many books about this topic. One I want to point to is The Business of Happiness. It's it's not very well known at all, and it's a book by a billionaire. His name's Ted Leonsis. There's actually around 50 books by billionaires that no one has heard of or bothers to read, which I think is a travesty on its own, because people will read a random book by a millionaire who made his first million, still has a lot of lessons to learn. And these books by billionaires, which are not well marketed because they didn't try and make money from them, they just put them out there to help people. No one knows about them, no one reads them. But again, if I have a whole blog post on that entire list. I don't think anywhere else on the internet there's a list like it, as extensive as mine. So again, you can check out my blog, willyoulaugh.com. Exactly as it's pronounced, that's how you spell the website, willyoulaugh.com once again. But I'm getting off track. So let's just dive into how you can solve this problem. I have everything I want, but I'm still not happy. Why? Well, here's the thing. Because money and materialistic things, whether it's cars, houses, mansions, holidays, traveling, expensive food, restaurants, women, these things fall under the bucket of materialistic possessions. And the problem with that is we are genetically wired to take these for granted and get used to them over time. And it's called, the scientific term is hedonic treadmill. Again, there's a lot of studies done on these things, and it's related to another term, which I don't want to bore you with scientific terms, so I'll just breeze through these really quickly. There's another term that's related to this, which is your happiness set point, which is basically the fact that, like, generally speaking, you just bounce back to your regular set point of happiness, whether, a year after even something horrible happened to you, like your legs got cut off in an accident, or you win the lottery. Again, there's been studies that have tracked these people and their happiness. So what's the point? Long story short, again, I don't want to go into detail on the studies to bore you, but long story short, there's been studies done on happiness across third world, second world, and first world countries, and how that relates to income and money. And what they found is that once you hit around a first world middle class income, your happiness as it relates to how much money you make, you get much less bang for your buck. And the correlation depletes and depletes and depletes until it diminishes, until there's really no correlation there. And it makes sense because before you hit that middle income level, you have to worry about putting food on the table. You have to worry about health insurance. You have to worry about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like the lowest level on that totem pole, which basically it's the basic necessities of life that deplete your happiness. You don't have water, you don't have food, you don't have shelter. And so having the money to afford those things from a third world country's perspective of course you're going to be happier. You're going to live a better life. You're going to have more resources, which will attract more women, which actually doesn't help with happiness. But you will, be able to actually have a wife. You'll be able to not worry about education or starvation. So of course that helps with happiness. But then once you get there, like those extra stuff, it really has no major effect. And you see this all over the world. You have, children who are born into a wealthy family, and they just take that for granted because they're born into that as a standard. And pretty much there's millions of people who are middle class right now, and their lives are a kind of representation as well of how this works, because many of them, their children just kind of take everything for granted, and they're not much happier. And it's funny because it's not their fault, because they kind of just take it for granted. They don't know that what they have is so amazing. They don't know it should be appreciated. It's just how they were born. But when you compare what they have to the richest person in the world 50 or 100 or 1,000 years ago, on almost every measure, their lives are better. Let's look at transportation. Now they can travel the world. The richest steel baron, Andrew Carnegie, of that time, 50 years ago, he couldn't do that. The richest pharaohs of Egypt, they could pay a ton, like a literal block ton, which is a weight, like 500 pounds of gold. They had that money, but they still could not travel the world like we do in luxury. They still could not watch the movies and entertainment that we have. Now we have thousands of videos and films that each cost hundreds of millions of dollars to create in a library of entertainment in the form of either YouTube or Netflix or going to the theater or Amazon Prime or whatever else for like $20 a month. And the richest people of the past did not have access to that, and yet here we are, many of us still unhappy. So you can kind of tell just by the nature of things that many of us are unhappy. And this is a topic I think is really crucial, and yet still not really focused on as much as it should be, because I still see it all the time, almost every day. In fact, Dan Bilzerian, he's like this guy on Instagram who has like 20 million followers. And he just kind of like every day he posts pictures of his lavish lifestyle where he's like on a private jet or, surrounded by beautiful women all the time. And he recently went on Larry King Now, which is a YouTube talk show. And Larry King asked him about his happiness. And he said, it's very tough for me to get to a 10 out of 10 out of happiness anymore. Back when I was poor, I could get to a 10 out of 10 just by going to Outback Steakhouse, which is a restaurant that literally costs like $20 to buy like a steak. It's like pretty cheap. And that was because his natural set point was in the military, where you didn't have much good food. You just had like a can of beans. He was in the army. And now he says it's kind of like cocaine or heroin or drugs, because he has to keep reaching for more and more and more to achieve the same level of happiness. He has to keep pushing the envelope to try and get that same hit. Just like a drug addict has to, they get used to the drugs. Their body gets used to it. So they have to take more and more hits of cocaine to achieve the same euphoria until they overdose. And now Dan has hit a point where, because his set point, what he's choosing to bring him happiness is more. He's hit a point where he literally said this in the interview. You can watch it on YouTube. But he basically said that now even if he goes to the most expensive restaurant in the world, he cannot hit a 10 out of 10. So does that mean we're all lost? Does that mean there's nothing we can do? No, actually, the science on this is fairly clear. And again, check out the book, The How of Happiness, for more details. But the basic idea is that those things don't bring you happiness, but there's plenty of exercises that you can do that will. Simple things that anyone can do. And that's why you see people like the Dalai Lama or Eckhart Tolle and they pretty much have nothing. They're pretty much broke. They spend their whole days just sitting in a room, meditating, focusing on their breath. And yet they're like, if you watch their interviews, they're always laughing and joking and having fun. Why is that? Well, there's been extensive science done and studies done. And here's a few practices that you can do to actually increase your happiness. The first one is gratitude exercises. So you just have to do it once per week. Studies have shown that after once per week, the effects diminish. So like doing it more, it doesn't help as much, but I still try and do it more than once a week because I still think it helps. But once a week should be enough. And it's really just, really appreciating and making effort to appreciate what you have and being grateful for it. And most people don't do that. They're just like, oh yeah, I don't appreciate this. Where's my next car? So for me, I like to write it down because it really burns it into your brain. If you type it out or say it out loud, I mean, it helps. It's better than just thinking it out loud, but it doesn't really force you to appreciate things. And the more I do it, the more detailed I get, and the more I start coming up with ideas of things that I have taken for granted that I shouldn't. Like just small things, like the fact that I can afford this expensive microphone that cost $100 to record this podcast for you. The fact that I have the luxury to do this and help other people. The fact that I have the education to read. The fact that I, don't have to be a sex trafficked worker. There's millions of people who are kind of screwed from birth because they're born into a corrupt government system and they have to trade sex to survive as a prostitute. And there's all these things, it just really helps to work on this. It takes practice, but you get better at this. And also because if you study the world more, you read more books about the world, you learn more about what's going on out there, you really get a greater form of appreciation. And for me, I've definitely struggled with happiness for a while, and it's really helped me because before that, and I still do this, you focus so much on what you don't have. Oh, I'm broke. I wish I had this. Oh, this is cool, but it'd be nice if I had more people who are interested in me. I wish I was more attractive. I wish I had more girls. And we have a tendency to focus on the negative, focus on what we don't have. And there's, again, scientific terms for this, studies done on this. And the basic idea, if you want to do further research, there's another great book called Hardwiring Happiness that talks about this. And there's a theme and a quote that's brought up in that book. The brain is Velcro for the bad and Teflon for the good. And basically, there's around roughly a 10-to-1 ratio where one negative event is emphasized 10 times more than a positive. So you need 10 positive events at least, or affirmations or compliments to surpass one negative insult or event that occurs in your life. And the reason that occurs, the book goes into more detail. It's genetic and evolutionary. Our ancestors lived on the plains, were hunter-gatherers, and negative events mattered much more to them. If you didn't emphasize them, if the bushes look kind of weird and it might seem like there's a tiger in there, if you don't emphasize that, you're going to die. So that bias developed over time for survival purposes. But in the modern world, it screws us over because, the worst that happens is people bring you down with their words, and we overemphasize that to the point of affecting ourselves and becoming mentally unhealthy. So what do? You consciously underemphasize the bad, and you emphasize the good. You really take time to celebrate the good. And I found this exercise from a podcast called The Mating Grounds, and it's basically a very successful entrepreneur. His name's Tucker Max. Him and his colleagues, as well as a highly established psychologist, Dr. Geoffrey Miller, they come on into this podcast and they basically talk about men's dating. And they talked about this concept, and they brought up an exercise called the Jar of Awesome. They got this from somewhere else, so it wasn't their original idea, but Basically, you write out a couple things as the day progresses that were awesome. Accomplishments, achievements, things that you should be proud of. And then at the end of the day, you read these to yourself. I do it on Evernote. I just type it out and just read it out. I like to catch it in the moment so I don't forget about it. So I would just open up Evernote when I have time and then just like write it out, preferably right after it happens. Sometimes I can't because I'm busy, but when I do, I'll write it, I put it into Evernote, and then at the end of the day, I will just read them out. Evernote is pretty much like Google Docs. Again, you could use Google Docs too. There's really no